Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to our second panel on a pioneer's perspective on generative AI. We've got all of our same panelists here. We've got our same host, Bill Joel, and Bill is going to introduce the panelists in just a moment. One announcement about the Pioneers reception this year, which is we're trying something brand new. And what we are going to do is have our Pioneers reception as part of the SIGGRAPH conference. Our featured speaker, which this year is a panel of speakers talking about the pioneers of computer graphics in the early days of the North Carolina Research Triangle area, which includes Henry Fuchs, Turner Whitted, Mary Whitten, and Nick England. They're all going to be talking at the panel that is going to be accessible to every attendee at the conference. So unlike previous years, we're really excited that the whole conference can actually hear our panelists live at SIGGRAPH. So I will turn this meeting over to Bill. I know everybody's really anxious to get talking about generative AI, the sequel. Take it away, Bill.
Okay, I'd like each of you to give me a 30-second intro for yourself. David, you can go first.
I'm David Spoelstra. I'm retired. I was a computer engineer and executive management in tons of in Fortune 500 and startups. And today I read probably 4 or 5 hours of AI stuff every single day, and I talk to people. I have lunch meetings almost daily now across Indianapolis with a wide spectrum of people understanding how AI is affecting them and their businesses and things like that.
Okay, Rebecca.
I'm Rebecca Perry. I started as a CG artist way back in the day. I taught at the University of Virginia, taught history of computer graphics and history of visual effects. I joined Epic Games to help launch their Epic Fellowship program, which was teaching filmmakers to use Unreal Engine for storytelling. And now I work for Lux Machina Consulting, and I lead the education and training efforts for that company. And I'm very interested in how AI is going to affect the jobs of content creators.
Okay, Dan, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Dan Goldman. I'm a senior research scientist at Google in the Labs Generative Media Group. Prior to that, I worked on Project Starline. Started my career actually in the visual effects industry, worked at Industrial Light and Magic for a dozen years on and off. Then went back to University of Washington for my PhD, and then worked at Adobe for 9 years before joining Google. So that's me in a nutshell.
And Blake.
My name is Blake Schreurs, and I am a software engineer. I work at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. I am the section supervisor of our XR collaboration team. So we are a team of folks who do augmented and virtual reality day in and day out. And over the past year or two, our entire portfolio has really been taken over by the intersection of augmented and virtual reality and the human user experience, human machine teaming, and associated topics. So it's really about how we use these new technologies to enhance user experiences.
Okay. Well, speaking of the new technologies, some people would say that, generative AI, all the possibilities of what you can do, et cetera, et cetera. And other people are rather fearful. So my question is, why do so many people fear generative AI? Yeah, Blake.
I think one reason is people are afraid that they're going to come and take their jobs. And your job is not going to be taken by an AI. Your job is likely going to be taken by somebody who uses AI, right? So this is a skill set that you should be paying attention to and building up and using. Right now, generative AI doesn't do anything super duper awesome, but it does everything mediocrely. And so if you're building a new skill and you're not up to mediocre, that's a big jump. So I think the amount of potential there is much greater than the harm and the good things it will do for people's productivities and outlooks. I think the thing that concerns me the most is right now, as we talk about the highest level of AI, which is significantly ahead of where most AI is, that it is controlled by a few very large corporations who are stomping people's rights in order to get content to train these models. And people have a right to be concerned about that. I think that's pretty legitimate. And how do you tackle that is a whole nother topic. So I think it's less the technology itself, but more the nature of the people driving the technology, who's in the driver's seat, and how they've driven thus far has been perhaps a little reckless.
Well, I would agree with you, because other than perhaps the technology of warfare, most technologies, it's not necessarily the technology that people fear. It's the use of the technology. That's what they're really fearing for. David, virtual hand.
I agree with everything Blake said. I think I ended last session by saying that it's a tool, learn it as a tool, and the people that adopt the tool are going to win. When I talk to people across Indianapolis, the people that are go-getters are excited and they want to know how to use this tool to get ahead. And the ones that are fearful are the ones that aren't learning the tool and are seeing how it's impacting them, and they're worried about it.
Dan.
I forgot my disclaimer, which is everything I'm about to say is my opinion only, not the opinion of my employer, all of that stuff, which seems especially relevant given the topic at hand. What I was going to say is I think I do also personally share some of those reservations and concerns. I think, this is a problem with our society and the way our economies are built, and it goes way beyond what, AI, specifically, AI is just like the latest in a string of things that large companies have serious control over that may look like it's taking control away from individuals. Maybe it is taking control away from individuals. I don't know. One thing I would say in the space of generative AI, though, is there's really a lot that is available to individuals that is not hard to access. And although it is true that in some respects, closed source proprietary models are ahead of where open source models are, the ecosystem that's available of interoperable models for text to image and text to video and all of these things, and the kinds of things that you can put together are in many ways ahead of what you can do inside a big company. I can't get more specific than that, but I could rattle off things like Comfy UI and Animate Diff, and these are all models that you can download to your own machine, run them locally if you've got a strong enough GPU, or there's many hosted services out there that are not that expensive, and so on and so forth. So,
well, there is one point that over the last, I think it's 6 months now, Adobe has integrated generative AI into its products. It is literally just a feature. You don't pay extra for it. It's just one of the other features in Photoshop, etc. So it's a bit more accessible, as you're saying, Dan, a bit more accessible even than saying, oh, there's some things you can download, etc. We're talking about major players are starting to incorporate it into their products.
I'm not downplaying the fear at all. I think there's aspects of it that are real. But going back to this, like, your job won't be taken by AI, it'll be taken by somebody who knows how to use AI. There actually are a lot of resources that are available to anyone to be able to try these things out.
So are you saying that it's not the same, for example, as when robotics became the threat in industry and people were scared out of their minds that the robots were going to replace them in the jobs?
Well, I don't know. I don't think I know enough about the economics of robotics, but certainly what it reminds me of is the advent of CGI for filmmaking. And I think we talked about this last time. A lot of people said, hey, computers are going to make the movies. Even today, we see news journalists saying computers make the movies, people don't. It's not true. And what did happen is a lot of professions, a lot of crafts became much smaller. But overall, many more people work in the filmmaking business, doing post-production, doing visual effects, doing these things that CGI has transformed. Not just CGI, but GPUs and nonlinear editing and these kinds of things that were all part of that same revolution. So many more people have access to that and can make a living off of that than could have 25, 30 years ago. So we have to look at both of those sides, I think.
Rebecca, you're being really quiet about this discussion.
I'm just thinking, I mean, I would like to change it a little bit, change the direction a little bit. I mean, I'm thinking about, there was a historian, Pamela McCordick, who wrote about a lot of the early AI researchers and interviewed them. And one of the things I read recently that she said was something like, in the early days, we believed that more intelligence would equal more virtue. How do we not understand that more intelligence would equal more potential for human misbehavior? So it sort of amplifies the ability to do wrong or right. But like any tool, that's true of any tool, maybe any powerful tool, any weapon, anything. But one of the things I think that is particularly characteristic of these AI tools is that they begin to blur the boundaries between the user and the tool. And you're not sure what the role of the human is anymore in these processes. So that makes them somewhat difficult to evaluate in terms of their beneficial versus, problematic effects, I think. And I'm thinking, I've been doing a lot of reading about, chat bots and people getting involved with generative AI conversational versions of that, and people feeling that they're in a relationship with the algorithm. And, that's, of course, as old as Eliza and even earlier. But that becomes an even more powerful and problematic situation, I think, with AI. So you get this erasure or the blurring of the role of the human and the role of the tool. So I think that's an interesting thing to sort of think about when you're thinking about the rules, And there's a lack of transparency too. I think Stanford recently came up with some kind of standards for evaluating language models, saying which ones say more about themselves, are more transparent in how they're created and what machines they run on, and what uses they can be put to. But right now, most of them have very little transparency. There's competitive aspects, reasons for that, but that's another, I think, interesting wrinkle to this whole thing.
Example, I have a friend, and I just had lunch with her today, and she went through a really tough breakup with a long-term boyfriend, and she used actual human therapist and Chat GPT, and she started dating or whatever a virtual boyfriend. And she actually started taking advice from the two AIs more than her own therapist in what was going on with her actual real human boyfriend. So that was kind of scary. And then the second is, you want to get scared. What scares me is autonomous robots. When the robots are actually autonomous with an AI, and they are learning and they are independent of a screen and can physically do things. That's the edge. I keep thinking Terminator,
I think we'd have to define what is meant by autonomous, because there are various levels of autonomy.
True. So, as much.
I mean, if you have a robot, what the robot can do is very, very narrowly defined.
True.
So within that really narrow range, it may be autonomous, but outside it has no impact whatsoever outside its range of activities.
You've seen the videos of the robots, the four-legged robots that can open a door by turning the knob. That's scary.
No, the question is did the robot learn to do that? Or was it really good coding by people that allowed the robot's software to be able to adapt to do it?
I don't worry about robots opening doors. I worry a lot more about autonomous vehicles. I mean, I have a Tesla, and I tried that they gave basically a free month of the full self-driving feature to everyone. And I don't want to say anything libelous, but I definitely had to stop it many times, at least once per mile, before it got me into an accident. And
Wow.
there's millions of those on the road today. It's not like, oh, in the future robots will be able to come hunt me down. No, there's autonomous vehicles out there today, some of which are better than others. I'm not gonna make a list, but I think that's a nearer term thing to worry about.
Yeah. I'm going to pull us back into generative AI because we look like we're going off into robotics, which Ed, that may be a wonderful talk in the future, but this is not this one. And with these data sets, the training sets, it's people creating the data sets, or do we have AI creating its own data sets yet? Rebecca's going, yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
That is something that has been sort of revealed recently. I mean, I've been reading news reports about how, there's some domains where there are very sparse data sets, and AIs are able to, they're able to generate their own data to fill in the gaps, say, in a sparse data set, and then use that. So that's very self-referential, if they can be said to have a self.
Blake.
I have done some work and have colleagues that do work in generating synthetic data. So we're using game engines, some of the more classic graphics tools to generate synthetic data for those sparse data sets, right? Because there is a lot of talk and work about data poisoning, right? And if you feed yourself your own generated data, causing problems that, essentially you start going off the rails when you're using these neural networks and you're multiplying the weights essentially by themselves over time. And so things do go off the rails. But what's interesting is a lot of synthetic data sets are too fake to begin to really train well. So you still need to use like a style transfer or something like that to improve the quality of the synthetic data. So yeah, again, we're getting back to, you start with something, you have a goal and you're doing something, and then you're using one AI to improve the quality of that, suitability of that for another AI to generate that synthetic data, to be able to train on it, to fill in some of the blanks. The fully automated feeding myself my own data sets, I think that's still definitely an area of active research and needs some really technically challenging solutions to become really viable.
How do you think generative AI is going to impact the concept of creativity, if at all?
What I've seen from my friends and the people I talk to is it's stimulating creativity. They are using generative AI to leverage what they're doing, which is giving them new insights into things, which then they have their own internal AI, which is then coming up with new ideas. And so it's a tool that's really enhancing their creativity.
I think when people worry about, AI taking over creative industries, I think there's multiple aspects to the creative act. One of them is creativity, but creativity is very additive. It's better when you do it with others, whether those others are humans or computers. It can the ideas are limitless, I guess, is kind of what I wanted to say there. It's not like you're stealing some idea from the AI. Now, whether the AI learned it from someone else, that's a different story. But I think in most cases, what I've seen is people's, their imaginations are stimulated by it, and they come up with new and more creative ideas. What the AIs lack themselves is a point of view, is grounding in the real world, grounding in real experience and lived experience. So I certainly believe that there will be a lot of AI generated crap on the internet that we'll have to wade through. But I also believe that what will resound with people and what will be the durable outcome of these new techniques are stories that we would not have otherwise have heard. And I use stories very expansively. Anything that a person wants to communicate. I guess art would be the real better word for it. It's just some emotional or internal concept that they want to transmit. And I that actually is really what continues to get me excited about this, is people being able to share things that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to.
Any generative AI is based on the learning set that it had. Don't you think that there's often a prejudice built into the learning set?
There is certainly bias inherent in the training set, and it's been demonstrated that certain training techniques can actually enhance that bias. So I think it's certainly something to be aware of. It's definitely something that large companies are aware of and are trying to counteract and researching ways of working against it. Some of those don't always work. I won't refer to any specific news articles, but I think this is a learning area. I also think it is something that can be addressed in the long term. It's a short-term problem.
I've been paying attention to myself. I've been very introspective as I've been using some of these generative algorithms. And I've noticed a few things with regards to my behavior. One is for tasks where I have a technical task that I don't have a skill. I needed to do something in a spreadsheet and I didn't know the formula. And I just, Gen AI'd it, got my answer, threw it in there. I did not learn as deeply that technique, but I got the answer that I needed. I got it quickly. And I also don't care, because it was like, how do I do alternate cell shading or something? Like, when I need it again in 6 months, fine, right? So for the things that I don't actually care if I'm learning deeply or not, I use it knowing that I'm not going to learn deeply, much like a GPS is a crutch that makes it harder for me to learn city streets in a city I'm unfamiliar with. If I'm driving in a city that I'm not going back to, I might not care. I will say the tools have not made me more or less creative. What they have done is provided me with the idea. I have tons of ideas. I love having ideas. They're cheap. They're easy. I can give them away. I have ideas all day long because I don't have time to explore them, right? Making an idea real, that's the expensive thing, right? I can come up with game concepts all day long. And so this allows me to explore those ideas more deeply. And so it allows me to understand the creative process better and go deeper into it, I think, very inexpensively. And so I think that's some of the promise there. And certainly we do have issues with bias and other things, but it changes how I explore the creative process, which I think is deeply exciting.
Rebecca, you got your hand raised.
I was just thinking as everyone was talking about this analogy with the self-driving car, and I'm thinking the creative process steered by AI in a way, assisted by prompts that take you in different directions as you move along through the process. It's kind of like if you had a self-driving car that would suddenly take you off on a road you hadn't planned to go, and you go for a certain period of time, and maybe you can take control again, and then maybe it later on decides to turn you off in some different direction. That could be creative. It could be exhausting. It could be intimidating. I don't know. There's many ways, but I think people can probably learn to work with that. People who who ideate for a living, especially in the creative fields, they develop a whole set of procedures for giving themselves room to have ideas and giving themselves new information. So I mean, there's that there's always that tension between having the space to explore and having aids to creativity versus getting overwhelmed by a tool that is, maybe producing things that are leading you astray from what your original idea might have been. Anyway, I think it's an interesting process. It's kind of a dance, right? Between you and the tool.
David, Blake, Dan.
I thought your question about prompt engineering was interesting because I think that with any tool you need to learn. So I have friends that cannot ever find what they want with a search engine because they type this big long thing and then it matches nothing. And I'm like, no, figure out what 3 keywords will match what you want, and boom, there it is. It's the first 20 links, And but however, AI, it's the exact opposite. You want to type a big long question, so they actually are now better off because they type these big long questions and they're actually getting the results they want with the AI. So it's interesting how that has played out. I noticed Marshall in the audience was saying that if only our clients in the creative industry had been good at crafting a prompt. And yes, I find that people are finding with AI that they have to communicate better their thoughts and what they want because it's different from a search engine. So that might actually enhance human communications. We can actually tell each other better what we want from each other. So that'll be interesting.
Better communication. Interesting. Blake.
One of the things talking about prompt engineering, I think right now we are in baby land. The technology is so nascent. It is so early on. It is just coming out of its chrysalis. And right now, the AI models think in text tokens, right? That's traditionally what they have done, right? And so now we see GPT-4o, where it's not, it's taking the speech directly and encoding that directly and not going through a text layer first, right? And I think that's really where we go, is when we start looking at other ways of interacting. And now we're getting into what I am deeply passionate about, right? Is that human machine team, where I want to show you, I have an art project that'll be showing at the summer's XR symposium, where I have a virtual environment and I'm just playing with blocks. And then I take a picture and say, make me an image that has this shape, right? And there's a number of stable diffusion type things, right? Where it's a sketch to image, that you're no longer just describing what you want. And we've seen some things in the last few weeks where it's like, oh yes, put a blob over here, now make this correction, that it's much more interactive than just text. I think it won't be long before the user experience is very different.
We are definitely in very early days. I completely agree with that. It's, how many people here use NURBS or B-splines before Softimage or Alias Wavefront? It's that level of like, oh yeah, there's tools, but they're not great. You had to be very familiar with the mathematics of it to get anything useful out. So I think we're at that stage with prompt engineering. But there is a flip side to it, which is I personally found that I've actually learned more about art and different styles. I took art history in college, but somehow I never learned who Alphonse Mucha was until people started using his name in prompts. Now, there's a whole ethical question about that. But for me personally, I went down a rabbit hole of, oh, that's that guy. Now I know, who made that thing that I've seen before, but I didn't know who. And likewise, we've been working, there's a lot of people been working with who are learning language of cinematography and learning what different lenses look like, because if you put a lens into a prompt, it will give you something, not exactly, but might be closer. What are different film stocks, and what are the different range of colors that you can get in different film stocks? So I find that this conversation started with, oh, are people going to lose some ability to some aspect of creativity? And I think actually it's enhancing some of those, as we said, ability to communicate about visual ideas. If you actually want to achieve something specific, a creative vision, there's plenty of mundanity involved. I just wrapped up a project where we created some 2D animation using some AI tools, and there was probably more work than if we did it using traditional methods, and a lot of paint work at the end to clean up stuff that it didn't get right. So that stuff still all exists, but it's in the service of, once you've locked in your creative vision, the part of being lost in the wilderness, that part of the creative process becomes a lot more fun and interactive.
One of the things that I'm remembering is how these tools open creativity to non-traditional creators, like everybody basically. I remember when Spore first came out and there was this explosion of, they made these tools to let you design your own creatures. Well, it soon, broached the limits of Spore acceptability. salacious creatures people were creating. They found ways to defeat the content moderation tools and create these very creative of things that express their own point of view and actually just their own desire to find the edges of the rules in that world. It's also true for, I will say, and maybe this is not a topic we really want to get into, but the internet, a huge chunk of the internet is taken up with porn, right? There's a company that has created something that allows you to design your own dream girl using AI tools. And the performers in that area are very nervous about this. It's like who owns their image when it's been digitized, or who has the right to control what happens to it afterwards. And so there's that tension between the people that are the source of the original say data, their own bodies, their own images, and people that are jumping in as creators and creating new content based on someone else's I don't know if you can call your own personal self your IP, but it's sort of it's an interesting area too for discussion. That's happened with the Joker too. They've successfully generated an almost identical image to the actual Joker that was designed for the film.
And I'm looking, we got questions coming up, and I want to get to some of those. So I have a question. It's a two-part, which is, first, which uses of generative AI most excite you? Not necessarily that it's here today, but you see it coming. And the other thing is, which uses of generative AI do you fear the most? Not only today, but in the future. And Blake's got his hand. Wake up real fast. Go ahead, Blake.
This is something I went through an experiment at work, and we were talking about where do we think these things could go in 100 years. And it was deeply sobering. I had some ideas, and then I had to go out for a walk because it scared the crap out of me. So where do I think it has the most promise? I think it has the most promise for voices of people that have been stifled before to just be seen and be represented in the larger world. I think that there is, by lowering the barriers to creative expression, it allows people who are not in the mainstream to be able to create and communicate with people that they identify with in ways that are meaningful, that they feel seen and they can be expressed and that they can be heard. And I think that is a vital, wonderful thing. And that is something that we need to keep on the forefront as we move forward. One of the things that terrifies me, and I think we need to do huge amounts of work in understanding attribution and understanding where content comes from, is when we start combining generative AI and social media and nefarious intent together. And that you could have an individual who has an off-grid AI, right, who perhaps really wants you to get fired from your job, and that they're able to look you up, and they're able to look up pictures of your kids, and then they're able to generate video of your children in compromising positions with you there and sending it out. Or that maybe you're off doing something important and you can't be with your kids, and so that they're making videos of your spouse in compromising positions and sending it to you just to throw you off your game. You might even know that it's fake, but you can't unsee it. Those are the kinds of things that just scare the crap out of me.
Most of it excites me, especially when it's used in a lot of research that is having breakthroughs. So, like, can this beat cancer and things like that? So I'm seeing breakthroughs all the time. I just read about Eli Lilly down the street from me and all the research they're doing with AI on new drugs, and they're finding new drugs like crazy. So that is exciting. Scariest thing to me is a lot about what Blake was talking about, how it can impact social media and how it can craft data and feed it back to people, and the people start to believe it more than any other external sources.
You're
And
talking about false narratives.
yeah, so every kind of false narrative, including fake videos and voices and everything else. So yeah, and Jenny Dana, I see in the audience, said one that really excites me that I use every day is as a learning tool. It's a personal learning tool that delivers the content at whatever level I want it. So if it's something I'm clueless about, I have it start in baby steps. And then if it's something I know a lot about, I have it start at, college professor level kind of thing.
I think we're going to move on to a lot of the comments that people have been leaving. This is from an anonymous attendee. I read an article recently about people using generative speech to make a voice avatar of departed family members to help with the grieving process. Responses were mixed, whether this was ethical and cool or creepy. One of the biggest underlying questions about generative AI is what data can be ethically used and who decides those rules, regardless of whether that data was public at any point or not.
That is a hugely sticky question, and it's going to vary between cultures, and it's going to vary over time because cultures evolve and change. I think there is a big question of who is it serving. There is something to be said for grieving naturally and going through the process and getting closure, right? And I think we talked about this a little bit in the first session. I also think that there may be a time and place where if somebody has dementia, right, they don't remember that their spouse is dead. That is a heart-wrenching situation, but it is a real situation. And, in those cases, instead of re-traumatizing the person over and over again, is having some mechanism to provide them some assurance may be the more ethical thing to do. And the truth of the matter is that I think these decisions are going to be nearly impossible to, as a culture, come to a consensus on, and that, we're going to have to understand, like so many things, that these, we're talking fundamentally about relationships and how we relate to other humans. And so we'll have to really try to understand the natures of these relationships and the value that they bring to the individuals.
One of the things that you were also talking about is not just the relationships between people, but the relationships between people and algorithms, and you can get sucked into these conversations with very lifelike conversation bots, say. And there has been a lot of work done on there's a whole category of inquiry or development called grief tech, which I think we touched on last time. And, the idea is that aids to memory and aids to mourning have been around since mourning. And people, the invention of photography and death photography and death masks were all ways to sort of preserve a person's memory at the moment of death. People can feel, they get sort of into a paralytic state where they can't move beyond. And, it's not a one answer question. I think it's very complex. But the problem is, and I have worked a little bit with Sherry Turkle, we're researching this right now. To what extent do people form an attachment to something that can never care about them or never, truly understand them, because it's not a corporeal thing, it's an algorithm. So even though it's based on data collected from a living person, in effect, the actual response is not human and can't be human. So I think that there are ethical issues there for sure. And I wanted to actually comment too on something that was Ed had mentioned earlier, the potential influence on news. There's been totally virtual newscasters, and they could be made to say anything. And that's an incredibly ramped up version of what happens on social media with the echo chamber and false narratives being promoted there. If you have a very realistic person telling you something, it becomes even more difficult to resist.
Especially if we cross the uncanny valley
Yeah.
and to its believable. Yeah. Let me
Yeah.
continue with some of these comments from the people here. Rajani says, not all of human knowledge has been published or communicated in a way that can be inserted in a database for AI. Stories passed orally in old Chinese tea houses, recipes shared in the narrow streets of shanty towns, and especially things produced by children are not and perhaps can't ever be part of an AI repository. How can humankind deal with this excluded knowledge that is so important and should loop into AI too? This goes to the idea of the selectivity in the way that the learning sets are generated.
I would challenge that a little bit. If it's being communicated orally, the AI can listen to it and put it in its database. All we have to do is have some way to get that recording or that audio to the AI. And as AI becomes has more sensors and things like that, it will be able to absorb more knowledge. So I'm not so sure about that. Like right now, I don't know anything about that because I'm not sitting there and hearing those stories. So those audio stories are very narrowly being presented. And if those people take their audio stories and want them to go to a wider audience, the AI is going to hear it too eventually. So I'm not so sure about that.
I think she's talking more about the way that the data sets that are used are often very narrow in scope. Do they need to be any broader, or is it better that they're narrow because assumably different data sets are going to be used for different purposes to answer different kinds of questions?
Great question. I'm not intelligent enough to know that, but I have been reading quite a bit about narrow data sets lately. So, maybe Dan knows more. I don't.
I'm going to keep going with the comments here. This is from Jay Marshall. Many of my students who are introverted artists are finding a greater ability to collaborate with fellow students through computer mediation, chat, Discord, and AI. We call it convincing the AI, but the skill set transfers to fellow human beings.
I think it's interesting because I feel like that to me is demonstrating, and not to be too critical, but this is a broader criticism, not about a particular program, that there is an opportunity missed here. We talk about software engineering, programming, and whatnot. So rarely do our engineering classes talk about requirements gathering and communication, which, frankly, if you don't have the requirements right, you're making the wrong damn thing. And it doesn't matter how good your code is. And so there is a fundamental how to communicate and how to be a team player piece that is important and gets lost in so many programs, and certainly the ones that I have when I was the student, right? So it's interesting, and I do appreciate that there are tools now to help bridge that gap. But it also makes me wonder, is there just a broader how to communicate as a team kind of thing that is essential these days?
Okay, let's do another comment here from Jenny. Project Astra was shown at Google I/O, and it was interesting. Multimodal AI interaction in RT. When this level of technology gets more mature and widely available to the public, it has the potential for everyone to have a useful AI companion, regardless of life stage. Teacher, tutor, personal assistant, companion. Comments?
I recognize her before on that. I use mine constantly, especially on the teacher part. And, I'll admit, some sticky situations I put in and said, like, what would you do in this case? And then, hear what it said and kind of reflect on what I was thinking and see if it had a different idea of how to handle the situation. So, I think that's one of the most exciting pieces in AI that I personally am using more day to day. And back to that previous comment, that was reflected in what we talked about earlier, and that is the different kinds of prompt engineering, like how you do a search versus a prompt engineering. And I think it will actually enhance communications, because to communicate to an AI entity, you're going to have to be clearer to get your point across. And I think that will help us communicate with each other better too.
Just that reminds me that one of the, regarding prompt engineering, and I think one of the aspects of the question that was asked was sort of, what do we become when we're communicating with machines? Does it change us? Does it change the way we will frame a question to get a better answer? So is that going to impact our thinking process?
Every technology that has ever emerged has changed how we think as humans and perspective. Now, yes, I'm coming from a very Western mindset, but it still does change the mindset of people. Another comment from Sebastian: my greatest fear is economic policy in the next 5 to 10 years. It's often cited, BCG study, where AI cited as a leveling technology and it's evenly distributed for now. For instance, a considerable amount of software engineering could be increasingly outsourceable.
I think what Sebastian's getting at is, let's just take the software engineering domain specifically, right? Software engineers make a lot of money right now. It's a good business to be in. And if, basically anybody can do it with a little bit of AI, then, then what happens to software engineering as an industry, as a profession? And I guess maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I think that it basically just transforms the kinds of things that people do. Actually, one of the things that I pitched, Google's not necessarily doing this. It's certainly not in the way that I envisioned. But one of the things when these language models were coming out that I pitched was, we should be thinking not about, at Google, we often talk about the next billion users. Who are going to be the next billion people that are online and that are using the internet. What if we switch that? What if we started talking about the next billion developers, right? If now a billion people have the capability of making apps, what kind of apps do they make? And I think if we look at it through the lens of today's, app economy or software engineering economy, it's the wrong lens to look at. Because what will people do? People will just make apps for themselves, right? Like, oh, I need an app that does this. Nobody else in the world cares about this app, but I do, because I need to do this one thing, and I'm only going to do it once. And so I'm not going to hire a software engineer to build me an app that does this one thing. But boy, I could really use it. And now I can make that in 5 minutes by telling an AI what I wanted to do. And now I have my app, and then I throw it away. So is that taking the job of a software engineer? No, not at all, because you would never ask a software engineer to do that. And so I think, I can't possibly predict what those things are, but that's an example. And we actually came up with dozens of examples of apps that you would never pay a software engineer to make, but that you might want for a 10-minute, 20-minute task. That if you had an AI that could make you an app, you would absolutely do that.
Ed is popping his head here. Does anyone want to go near the 2024 election AI scenarios?
Such an important question. I mean, it's critically important. The amount of, inaccurate and false and misleading information that's already flooding us, even without being amplified by very compelling AI tools, is overwhelming. And it's a huge problem. I don't know how we begin to solve that. I think it's I don't know. That's what frightens me tremendously about this.
One of the things that I think is interesting, right? Because before I talked about attribution, right, and wanting systems that help you find where did this data come from, who wrote it, and what do they want to say. And I do think that is important. But one of the things that frustrates the heck out of me as a human watching other humans is, to use a tool like that, you have to want to care, right? And the problem is that people love reinforcing their own narrative. And therefore, when they hear completely fabricated whatever that already reinforces the narrative that they have, no matter how false it is, they want to hear that. And so they're not going to think critically about it. And that is a very human thing to do. And now we're getting down to the fundamentals of what it is to be human and have a society of humans. And I have no good answers for that.
You're talking about the echo chamber phenomenon, which was being amplified way before AI came onto the map. Specifically, when we had social media phones, it allowed people of like mentality to connect over great distances and ignore everybody else.
And there's also the backfire thing, right? If you point out the factual fallacies, that doesn't actually help bring things to light. It just reinforces the other person's resolve.
People have to be interested in hearing alternate points of view, which, yeah. But another problem is, specifically in 2024, which wasn't true for earlier social media sort of tools, is that, the capability of generating video and generating very realistic images of things that are completely fabricated. People already say, the moon landing was not real. People are going to say the riot in the Capitol was not real. So-and-so did not really win the election. Here's an alternate speech given by so-and-so. And that's just, I think, it's upon us. And we don't have any tools to really disambiguate and filter out the truth from the untruth at this point.
We've had Photoshop for quite a long time, so it's been possible to fake visuals for 20 years now. And although there certainly have been instances where people tried to influence elections and other things with that, it's turned out to be, I think, if you measure it in society at large, less of a problem than people imagine. I'm not sure that that's true with AI, but there's reason to be hopeful. But what I worry about, I didn't answer this question earlier. I think the thing that I do worry about more than anything else is that language models have been shown to be more convincing than humans in persuading them of things that they might not otherwise believe. That's something different. That could be abused. Right now, that's reserved for the best and therefore most expensive models, which does limit the capability of that to do sort of like, mass propaganda. But that is coming soon, and that is something that I am more scared about.
Yeah.
I guess the one saving grace is maybe everyone will have it equally, and then we'll all just be like equally that much better at convincing each other of our various dubious ideas. But yeah,
I keep hearing from everybody that it's not the tool itself, it's not the AI tool, it's not the software, it's the use of it, and it's who's using it for what purpose.
Yeah, Carl Anderson posted on the chat a New Scientist article that chatbots can persuade conspiracy theorists their view might be wrong. So I guess there's a flip side to even the persuasiveness issue.
Like we keep saying, it's no different than any other tool. When newspapers came out, it was, who was printing the newspaper and everything that had the power and the ability to persuade people and convince people of things. So this, and then social media came out, and then it was even more. And now we've got AI, and AI combined with social media. So yeah, it's a real problem. And the problem I see, one of the problems is humans are slow to adapt to change and what's going on. And this is just happening at lightning speeds, and it's just overrunning you to an extent. And it's hard to grasp. A lot of my friends haven't grasped just how far it has come until, we have these little meetings and we start talking about it, and they're like, oh my God, you mean your practice now at your doctor's office? They don't even take notes. The guy has a laptop. Well, the laptop's transcribing everything that's being said and putting it into the patient record, so and summarizing it and putting it into the patient record. So there's already AI programs just for doctors and everything else, and people just do not realize how far AI has gone into society, because they're just looking at their little bitty domain and what has happened like at their personal job, and they're not getting the global expansive view of what's happening in all these other domains.
Change comes slowly, but it's not evenly distributed, like, to paraphrase that old phrase. I mean, some groups are embracing it very quickly. Some groups will never embrace it. Some groups are slower. And so that's the thing. It can actually exacerbate divisions and exacerbate tensions because it's not being evenly distributed among all people, even at whatever rate you want to say it's happening.
Is it as far advanced as a technology as people actually fear it to be?
In some ways, it's not, right? It's not doing the things that people are imagining it is doing. It does not feel. It is not coming up with new solutions to problems. It is really regurgitating from a broad variety of already known solutions, which I mean, I gotta say, that's how I do a lot of my work. Is I'm not coming up with novel solutions to things. I'm using solutions that I have learned through design patterns or what have you.
And that's an engineering approach. Yeah,
it's an engineering approach. That said, I think part of the promise here is that, again, even now, knowing that it is giving mediocre results to huge numbers of things, I will use this as a personal example. I have a child that has an individualized education plan, and as part of that, the school needs to come up with objectives and goals. And I will tell you, the objectives and goals that come out of the different schools are wildly different and have hugely different levels of quality. My wife is a special educator. She is fantastic at her job. So I know what a good objective and a good goal looks like because she has taught me. And some of the ones that I am getting are not that. They are so far. They are subpar, and that you can go to ChatGPT and it will generate a better, like, it's not going to be like the super amazing objective for this child, right? But if it is just a well-written, clear, understandable objective that has understandable metrics that actually make sense for the education process, we've gone from bottom of the barrel to fully acceptable for a really useful applied situation. And so it's one of those things where it's like, oh, but a human didn't come up with that objective. Like, I don't care, right? The human is reviewing it, making sure that it applies to that child, but they didn't have to write it from scratch, and that the minimum quality we're getting past is far higher than what we were getting before. But I think that's where that human machine team is fantastic, right? That if these AIs have seen huge amounts of IEPs and they've been trained on them and the books about them and what makes a good IEP objective, right? If they know what the criteria are to write a quality item and have seen all of these other solutions, while every child is unique and has a unique combinations of factors, any one of those factors are not that particularly unique. It is the combination that makes it unique. And so having a resource that is providing well-known solutions and is doing it in a way that isn't just rote copy paste from something else, I think is a huge advantage. But you're right, that human has to really know the student and make sure that the objectives and the goals being written for that student are appropriate, as opposed to just a blind AI system that doesn't know the student. So I think having the educator in the loop who really understands the student and is then really able to easily tailor an education plan for that student, that's where I think that team is phenomenal.
David, you got your hand raised. What's up?
Is that any different than someone listening to a person right now and just accepting what they say and go do something, whether it's a person or the AI telling it and them accepting? I don't see any difference. But I wanted to get back to your original question, which was, is it living up to the hype? Well, it depends on how you define what the hype really is. But to me, once again, as I've always said, this is a tool. and as a tool, it is phenomenal. And I see Fran here mentioned something in the chat about her superintendent, has reduced the time from 8 hours to 2 hours to do some forms and things like that. It's fantastic as a tool. And I totally believe it's living up to its hype as a tool. My doctor, transcribes now for the insurance. So he's able to spend more time actually talking to me and listening to me rather than typing in all the stuff he needs to for the medical, for the insurance. And so as a tool, I'd say, yeah, it's absolutely living up to the hype. As like some standalone new being, I'd say no, not really, but as a tool, yeah, absolutely. And we went across design patterns. Okay, what is a design pattern other than a whole lot of people kind of doing the same thing, which is exactly what AI is terrific at. Looking at what all of mankind is doing and coming up with those patterns. And that's why it's so good at predicting what we're going to do. We keep thinking we're individual little snowflakes, and in reality, a lot of what we do is herd animal stuff. And so, or just the fact that the way we are, we tend to do herd animal stuff. That's why it's so good at predicting what's gonna happen and how we're gonna do. But as a tool, I'd say absolutely it's living up to the hype. But that's me. I'm investing heavily in AI. I hope it lives up to the hype.
Google and Meta and Amazon and Microsoft are spending huge amounts of money. So they believe that there's something, it's not a philanthropic effort on their part. They believe that they're going to at least capitalize on the hype, if not, realize massive profits from the things that they're developing.
See, when I say hype, I'm not only talking about the hype of the good things that AI could do, but the hype of the bad things that AI could do. I'm looking at both sides. There's somebody by the name of Blake. He wrote down, don't want this great comment from a while ago to get lost. Rajani asked, who decides what is relevant? And I think that's with respect to the learning sets. People at this point. Do we have it where AI can create its own learning sets?
The question is which people, and Dan, I'm going to ask your forgiveness because I think right now the answer is very large corporations who do not love you are the ones that are designing those data sets. And that is a legitimate concern. And what do we do about it? Now, I will say there are more public data sets that are curated by academics who, and there's a huge amount of the open source community who are making those data sets available via Kaggle and Hugging Face and other resources so that you can see what goes into some of these, right? So there are ways to see transparently. So I think it's,
so you're telling me that these open source groups, et cetera, that they have no bias whatsoever.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that they have no bias, but what I am saying is that you can see what their bias is. Right, that this is at least an open data set, and it's such a challenge because on one side, I want to remove as much bias as I can out of these systems, but also I understand we talk about removing emotion from these systems and removing bias from these systems. But that is the only thing that as humans we have really known or understand. And as we do that, the results seem to be less relatable. And so I don't know how to balance those two truths. I think it's very challenging. If you have answers that are devoid of emotion, that are, one of the big things that, we've seen very recently with speech to voice systems, right? The big thing that we have, the big thing that's helping these gain more traction is the fact that we are adding emotion in there. We're adding inflection. We're adding emphasis and interest. to the voice instead of being dead. And so by doing that, we're making them more palatable to the humans that are listening to them. Because before, the old school, completely synthesized flat voice was off-putting, right? And so yes, and that, and I think that also goes for the text too. Like sometimes you read some text and you're like, this feels wrong. The emotion in this is wrong. And so I think that what gets us over the uncanny valley is the addition of emotion and potentially bias, which is also concerning, because you have to think, where did this come from and what is the bias? But I think that's also what makes that content more relatable, and that's a challenge. That's an entire career's worth of challenge right there.
On a personal level, I share the concern with large corporations deciding what goes in the data sets. At least there's multiple corporations that are in the game right now, and so you have some competitive urge to be less biased, or at least be fairly biased in a way that is less harmful. But the other thing, and I'll get a little technical here, is there's multiple stages of training these systems. And the one that requires like just massive quantities of data is called pre-training. And it's called pre-training because what you get out of that is basically useless. I mean, it has some agglomeration of concepts. And that's really the reason it requires so much data, is to be able to make connections between disparate concepts. But it can't do anything for you. And so the chatbots or other systems that are actually designed to accomplish specific tasks they take that pre-trained model and they'll fine-tune it on a much smaller data set. In the case of chatbots, you want it to take instruction. You want it to actually do what you're asking it to do, not just go off on a tangent. It is, to not start, spouting hate speech at you. You want it to be, aligned. You want it to not be biased and give advice that is advice or instructions that are not racially biased or biased in some other way. So those are like some of the factors that go into it. I'm sure I'm like missing dozens of other factors. Some companies like Anthropic have published what they call a constitution, which they actually, they developed this constitution in collaboration. It was an open process by which they developed this constitution. It's sort of like their version of the 3 laws of robotics. It's like, what are the guidelines by which our language model is going to abide? So there's that. And then, but I bring up this distinction between pre-training and fine-tuning to say the fine-tuning process does not require 1 billion GPUs. It's something that maybe not individuals, but small companies can do. If you have a data set that you believe is better for some specific task or for any general task, you can fine-tune models. Either open source models, Meta has open sourced their Llama model, or most companies that have closed source models allow fine-tuning. I believe, and I may be wrong about this, that Gemini has a fine-tuning API, maybe not the latest version, but the previous version. And I believe OpenAI has a fine-tuning system as well. So not a panacea, it doesn't solve the problem, but it is not the case that large companies decide the data sets and that's all that matters.
I'm watching the clock now, and I think it's time for us to do some final wrap-ups. And we've still got most of the people who've been with us are still there online with us. This is absolutely fabulous. So I'm going to start with Rebecca.
Well, I am very encouraged by what Dan was saying, but I feel like, I read recently that I was mentioning all these large companies and their large investments. They're investing about 200 billion in research and R&D, and all those companies together around 200 billion. The Pentagon is investing like 138 billion. It's reassuring to think that there's a plethora of voices out there and companies competing to offer different points of view on this, and they each have their own way of avoiding biases or of trying to disambiguate or something. The Pentagon, and not just the Pentagon, but other militaries around the world, they are trying to create systems that will enable decision support systems. So that is another frightening thing to think about, that talking about taking emotion out of decisions, out of communications. They're trying to do analytical systems that will help them make decisions about like when to push the button. So I just wanted to mention that. Not really summing up, but just another sobering thought, maybe.
David, final comments.
That was sobering, Rebecca. Thank you for that. I mean, it's probably what I said last time. This is a tool. Learn the tool. Get ahead. Use the tool for good. Apply it to your personal work, and move your industry forward in good ways, hopefully. And I mean, use it as that, but and also, life is a contact sport, so get involved, talk about things. If you're worried about the government making AI dogs with flamethrowers, speak up. Thank you. Oh, and go to SIGGRAPH.
Well, I was going to say at the very end, register for SIGGRAPH this year. The conference is going to be in Denver, Colorado, end of July, beginning of August. It looks to be a wonderful conference. It's a fairly new convention center, and it's in a good place. It looks like it's going to be a good conference, and I'm hoping we're going to get good attendance. Dan, final comments.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any great concluding comments, but I'll come back to a question that you asked earlier, which is like, is the hype real? And I've been kind of a cheerleader, optimist. I mean, I'm paid to do this stuff, so of course I have to be. But I actually think that we are in an era that is very similar to the dot-com boom. As Rebecca said, a lot of companies are putting a lot of money into this. The actual gains from that are really yet to be achieved. I do think there are many instances, like in the dot-com era, where the internet was amazing. It enabled us to do things we could not do before. But is it worth the billions of dollars that's being poured into it? I think there's going to be a reckoning. I think the actual use cases are not of a magnitude that will amplify the productivity quite as much as people think. I think in the long term those things are true, but I think when investors realize that their investments are not going to come back to them in 6 months, there is going to be likely a pullback. So as optimistic as I am about the long-term prospects for all this stuff, I think there actually is frothiness in the markets over where they're at.
And lastly, Blake.
I do work in the defense sector at times. So I have seen a lot of talk about AI in the defense sector. And I will say, every single project that I have seen has been focused around saving American soldiers' lives more than anything else, that keeping the people that protect our country safer. And so I understand when we start talking about military AI, it is a very scary topic. I think especially when we start getting outside of the US government and how well it works. But when we start talking about governments of our near peers that do not share our moral values, I get extremely concerned. And so I think actually, to David's point, getting involved and understanding the amount of open source that is available in this field is unlike anything that I have ever seen in my entire career. It is unbelievable. And that people can go and they can get involved, and you can download, AI tools, and you can train things, and you can run it on your local machine. And in some cases, for smaller things, you can train it. And that right now, as is the nature of tech, it is already becoming more democratized. It's becoming smaller and more efficient. And so we can get into more people's hands. Now, whether or not democratizing that is a good thing or not is going to vary very greatly depending on who you ask. Again, In the United States, we generally think of that as a good thing. In other places, maybe they don't think that that is such a great thing so much. That said, go out, get involved, understand how it works, understand how that you can use it. And I will encourage people to, as they learn these tools, to think about what it can do for them right now, right? And we think about, like, for programming, right? Oh, we're going to outsource code. But there was a cool comment in there where it's talking about apps, and it's like, well, maybe I won't need an app, right? Jump that next step. Jump the step after that, because there are things that, I will say that I am researching and looking at that are going beyond it's not just a code copilot, right? It is not just writing code for me. It's writing tests for me. It's writing the whole darn thing for me. It's doing whatever. Jumping steps and really thinking ahead, because this is unlike many things that we have seen before, and it does allow for that chance to leapfrog. So going out and getting involved, and as you do so, keep in mind fundamentally that yes, this is a technology, and we need to worry about who is driving it, and we need to think about the people behind it, and always try to keep in mind who are the people, what are the relationships. Because at the end of the day, that's really the thing that matters, is using the technology for trying to improve the lives of as many humans as we possibly can.
I flashed into mind the kind of software systems that existed in the Star Trek shows, specifically Star Trek: The Next Generation. And I was thinking the kind of AI system they had on, I'm like, we're starting to get that already, and we're not hundreds of years in the future. Thank you all very, very much. And I really want to thank everyone out there who has stuck with us for the hour and a half or more that we've been here. I'm going to pass it back to Ed. But before I do, if you really like this, send Ed an email. Contact the Pioneers, okay? Let us know that you really like this and you want more of these kind of sessions, because there is this, call it a brain trust, that exists within the Pioneers in experiences all over the map. Ed, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you guys. This has been an awesome discussion this evening. Everybody, please go to SIGGRAPH. If you are not a Pioneer, please join the Pioneers group. The only requirement is that you've been working in CGI or interactive techniques for 20 years or more. I will edit this and it will get posted to the SIGGRAPH YouTube channel. Our previous panel with these same folks from February is already posted to YouTube. If you just Google SIGGRAPH Pioneers Generative AI, it'll come up. You'll find it. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody, for attending.